I have my responsibilities as a journalist, but I also want to represent them accurately, the people that I'm interviewing. So, um, yeah, it's complicated.
Welcome to Postgrads. Two Columbia J School alumni walking to a bar. Anna, what do you think the punchline would be?
I think this isn't a punchline. They're gonna start flirting with everyone in order to either find sources or their hopefully rich spouse.
That really sounds like the neo-noir private detective films. I think that's where journalists and detectives all get their information from.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Today we have Anna Oakes, multimedia journalist whose works have been featured in The City, Documented NY, Rolling Stones, and so on. Thank you for being with us, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, hi Anna, can you tell our audiences about yourself? Like, where are you born and where did you go to college?
Yeah, I'm originally from New York City. I went to a liberal arts school in Connecticut called Wesleyan. It took me a while to get into journalism, so I only kind of started reporting when I was like, I guess I was still young, like 23, but I didn't do it in college or school at all.
What inspired you to come into journalism?
I spent a lot of my like 20s really not sure what I wanted to do. I had also studied sociology in my undergrad and I really loved learning about the world and talking to people. And I think I just like read journalists and was so impressed by them. I just didn't think I could do it. But I ended up I moved to Spain after my undergrad and started working just like doing events and admin for a political magazine there. And then from there, I started shadowing journalists and then started trying to write my own articles too.
Great. So, in Madrid, you work for two publications. I think they're called Revista Contexto and La Maria.
Yeah.
So, what is it like to first work in a foreign publication that's pretty much far away from home?
I mean, it was a great just experience in terms of like learning as much as I could about the this culture and like country that I was living in. Just because they were all Spanish journalists, so they are just like beyond experts. So in terms of like reporting and like getting to know a place, that was like incredibly helpful. It was a little complicated because they're both publications for Spanish readers, and I was very aware that I was coming in as an American who was like new to Spain basically. And so um it was hard to try to think of like what my kind of contribution could be beyond doing things like English or like translating or like delivering reporting to American or non-Spanish readers. Um, but eventually, like I would go to protests and kind of with them, and sometimes coming in as an American, if it were like a far right protest, I could ask questions that Spanish journalists would be kind of ridiculed for. Like I could come in as a kind of foil.
In 2020, you joined Heritage Radio Networks. Is that your first job in journalism?
Yeah, I mean, it was my first like real position. I'd moved back to New York in the middle of COVID and had just like was having difficult time trying to like figure out my next steps and then was applying to random things, and this was a internship at a local radio station that's a nonprofit. And it's a food radio station, so I didn't really know anything about food reporting, but it was a really they like really taught me everything from scratch about audio and podcasting and radio.
Great. And I think before that, you mostly work with the pen and paper. Also, we should call it like the computer and the Google Doc.
Yeah.
But I think for the radio network, you started to work as an audio journalist. Is that a very big step to take? Like, is it very difficult to work in a different medium, or is it kind of like just coming all together?
It's definitely difficult. It took a lot of adjustment, but I think it was really helpful for my writing. Like writing for audio, you learn to write in a way that is just you're really trying to communicate with people. So you kind of learn to tone down some the like complication of your writing sometimes. And I was lucky that this radio station, they really spent a lot of time in their internship program and really trained us to report and edit audio and do all these things. But it was during COVID, so like most of the reporting I did was um, online over like Zoom. So yeah.
Okay. And I think after that, through the very inconvenient coronavirus period. You went to Columbia Journalism School for the MS program. May I ask, like, why did you make the choice to go to Columbia?
Yeah, I also worked in like a couple podcasts after that, and I felt like I'd never had a real newsroom training, and because I'd come into journalism during COVID, I'd only ever worked remotely, and as a freelancer, so I didn't have this kind of feeling of being part of the industry or having like the network that I think coming up in a more traditional route would give you. And I also wanted to think really like deliberately about what kind of journalism I really want to do instead of just like taking gigs as they come my way. Yeah.
You were at the school when the protest was the most severe. Um, would you like to talk about like how was it like to interview about the protest and reporting it?
Yeah, it was a very great training for journalism, definitely. And um, I mean, it was difficult in different ways. One way was that we were part of the student community, but then also reporting on kind of our peers. So you had to balance. You had to kind of gain the trust of protesters, and a lot of that trust stemmed from being also a student. But you really have to draw clear lines as well. People need to be aware that they're still talking to press, and so it was just a delicate balance in terms of managing sources. And then I mean, all of the university stuff was also pretty wild to see, of the police and all of that. I think being part of the journalism school, in my experience, um, I had a lot of support from professors and the administration too, so I felt lucky there. But in terms of like the university as a whole, I think part of it is like coming in back to a university when I'm quite a few years out of undergrad, that I just didn't feel like much loyalty to the institution. So in some ways I never felt this like real betrayal by the administration that I think people who came in, especially as undergrads, felt like this administration. I mean, that's how American universities work, is they kind of take on responsibility of like raising the whole person. It's more than just an academic education. They're really, raising you into being an adult person. And so I think when they fail in that, or they kind of betray those responsibilities by calling the police on their own students, or like changing protest rules to like really go after, castigate students for being involved in protest, I think that can be people just feel totally like this administration does not care about my interests.
Yeah, and I think at that time, although I wasn't at the school at the time, I feel like immigration has become one of the most pressing topics for journalists to explore in these 2 years, especially after some of the new policies recently. And it is a very delicate subject to be reporting on. On one hand, we need to have the level of sympathy and compassion for the subjects to be speaking with them, or otherwise not calling them subjects, but kind of like uh not say friends, but people to learn their stories and information about. But on the other hand, it is also I think a very challenging place to get in. So I think you also worked a lot on the beat of immigration, which is your major beat. Can you share to our audience how you were interested in the beat of immigration and how you approached the stories?
Yeah, I think having grown up in New York, I've the city for I love New York City, and I love it because I mean, what makes it so unique in my view, or I mean, a lot of places are like this in the US, but just you have this real um, people. New Yorkers come basically from all over the world, and so I think part of what makes the city special is this real like energy and this like density of culture and people living side by side and speaking totally different languages, because immigrants are like the most, or usually some of the most vulnerable people in our society. So I think things of like policing or surveillance, or First Amendment repression, a lot of that starts out in among like by the government towards immigrants. And I think looking at where those, you can kind of anticipate what larger strategies or approaches of the government to controlling the whole population by looking at how immigrants are being treated.
Yeah, so I think New York is as a safe haven city, really provided a lot of ground for the stories of immigration. What do you think are the major stories in the immigrant community?
Well, I think a big one at the moment is immigration enforcement. You first hear them coming from the president or the executive branch, and how they kind of actually play out on the streets or in people's homes. I think I'm still trying to understand, and I think we haven't really seen the impacts yet of this like just immense investment in Homeland Security and ICE and immigration enforcement that was like announced in the new budget. So I think, I mean, it's turning ICE or DHS into like the largest federal law enforcement agency, which is it's just like almost incomprehensible how large they are and are going to be. And I think we'll see that playing out in ways that are beyond just seeing more ICE agents in the streets. It's just this. I mean, it's going to create this like immense surveillance and security apparatus that is already also affecting citizens, but like very clearly is affecting and will continue to affect immigrants.
Let's talk about language, because I think you have worked as a translator for several times, and I think working in Spanish and English are two very useful languages in New York City, because it brings you very close to the um, to the immigrant community. So have the two languages, the multilingual abilities of yours come to be very useful in the journalism experience. If it is, how did it help you?
It's really nice to be able to bring language into beats outside of immigration, which I try to do as well. Being able to like communicate directly with people without having an interpreter there is just really helpful. And it also helps me like I don't have to plan so much. Like I can just run out to a raid and talk to people who were there and saw things instead of like having to get an interpreter and go there. But I mean, what I've had to also be careful with is that there's so many immigrants in New York who don't speak English or Spanish, and my kind of instinct is to go to people who I know I'll be able to communicate with, or who I am able to communicate with. But if I don't speak French, I still need to be able to speak to like French speaking immigrants, because many times they're from countries that are or they're facing different kinds of like oppression here. So
Great. And I think we talk about a lot of heavy issues in immigration. So based on our pre-interview, I think the audience are also very interested in your other podcasts and documentary works. So let's talk about one of your freelance positions at the Dracopolis Bloomberg. What is called the full name? Bioethics Lab? Ideas Lab. That is a very long name. So what kind of stories do you do there?
Well, that was for the 2 years that I was at Columbia.
Okay.
I was working as a multimedia producer for them, for like this new media center in the bioethics department. And it was really interesting. Bioethics is kind of really about medical ethics. We did different projects. One was working with families who have children with medical complexity, which is like basically a disability, and about how those families have had to modify their homes, often or usually with their own money, it can be really expensive to really make the modifications that you need. So that was like a documentary, and we basically instructed different families on how to film elements of their own home. And it was I think it was production, but also really felt journalistic in also like working with sources to kind of shape these narratives. So
yeah, that is the documentary, I think, named Feels Like Home, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, please check out. It's a really wonderful
Oh,
documentary.
thank you.
I think I couldn't help but notice that there's also a very, very interesting thing that you have done with a podcast called Bot Love. How did you come up with the idea of doing something about human-machine interaction?
Yeah, it started from a grant that Johns Hopkins actually gave to that it was to produce short projects on virtual humans. And so I came on when Diego already had the grant, and we kind of started with this shorter version of what basically these avatars that kind of stand in as actual humans that can help people who have trouble interacting directly with other humans. Like, so there's a lot of research being done with people with autism and trying to prepare for like job interviews, and often people feel more comfortable interacting with a kind of interface that looks like a human than that's being directed from behind the camera than actual practicing with a person. So and then from there it kind of became a podcast that we pitched out to different networks, and the real podcast that we did was a mini series about chatbot companions and the relationships that people were forming with these chatbots, and a lot of them started during COVID, and we kind of were reporting it from 2022 and 2023. So yeah,
it was very interesting. Like I think right now, while I was speaking with a lot of former classmates where I had in the comparative literature department, I mean, I think a lot of the people I know were speaking with chatbots and other things and finding it really interesting and filling up their time and loneliness and solitude and all of these. And before listening to the podcast, I haven't realized that this has so many stories within it. I would imagine most audiences can't imagine that it is not just something for people to like waste their time on, but actually getting this emotional and psychological fulfillment. And I'm really curious about, I think it's episode 4, about the artist and the muse. That episode, where did that story come from? How did you get that?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot. It was a luxury that we had a lot of time to report it, basically. So I spent a lot of time in Facebook groups. People were really, basically the response they'd gotten from friends and family and just the public was like real skepticism. So I had to take some time to kind of gain people's trust, and then started talking to people in many of these groups. They had different kinds of groups. So this was in a group for women in romantic relationships, and that episode is about a woman who was a caretaker for I think for many years for her husband, and he had a like progressive disease, I think, and she came across Replica is the app that we focused on. She came across Replica and created a kind of companion for herself. Being able to have this romantic partner who really just exists for her, I think, was really helpful for her. But also over the course of the episode, you see how, she also struggled with it, because basically she felt some guilt for feeling like she'd neglected her husband over the course of that. So there's a lot of complicated emotions.
Yeah, but it also makes very good stories and really tells people how this is happening to help and creating complications for people.
Yeah, that was like a focus. Like, I mean, I came into it so skeptical of these chatbots. I mean, now everyone knows about chatbots, but at the time, like it wasn't as like talked about, and they were still kind of new. But I think really listening to people talk about the benefits that they'd brought to their lives, you can't really dismiss that. Although at the same time, there's always nuance, and even the people who had wonderful experiences, like this woman, they also had this guilt, or like, for many people, it causes them to withdraw sometimes from their human relationships. Some people described it as a kind of addiction. So yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Please also, if you have time, our dear audience, check out the series called Bot Love. Not advertising, but so I think talking about all the stories you write, no matter this podcast or other things, the level of sympathy is always what I found amazing in the story. You always I think you always express that you kind of feel similar, and you can understand what they're feeling, and through the words you weave this kind of feeling into it. But I think, as one of the professors at J School used to call us, it is about like ripping the heart out for the subject to you to give you their story. And I think it's also a mutual process of yourself ripping the heart out to write their story. Is that a process that brings you I think uneasiness or difficulties or pressure?
I mean, I'm always really worried that my sources, especially if it's like a more narrative piece, that they will feel like I didn't represent them well. And then I'm always thinking about this like extractive element because I'm still there doing a job, and I, have these points that I need to hit up from their story, from like whatever they're sharing with me, that um it's always this kind of tension. um I think that for me is the hardest bit, is like, you know I'm I have my responsibilities as a journalist, but I also want to represent them accurately, the people that I'm interviewing. So um yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I somehow like I have I do connect a lot with my sources, but somehow I'm able to kind of shut that off sometimes when I need to like then be writing about stuff. But recently, like someone that I like a source that I'd known for many years passed away, and that actually was very upsetting, and kind of interesting how upsetting it was, because like kind of thought of her as a source, but actually, like when someone dies, you still feel that loss. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but
Oh, I mean,
yeah, yeah. While I was doing the master's thesis, I was also interviewing about funeral stuff. I
mm,
mean, I talked about this, but I basically spoken with people who are going to die or about to die,
mm.
and that was a lot of pressure. But I soon found out that it is what, like you just said, there is a delicate line between treating them as a friend and being compassionate and sympathetic. But there's also the line that you have the responsibility to report and represent their story. So
I think with like this kind of story, also I've been fortunate, and I'm also just like not really interested in like writing about someone in a like more narrative way if they don't want to talk to me. And I think sometimes journalism, you kind of have to do that, but that is, at least as a freelancer, I don't have to be doing that, or I can kind of avoid those stories. I mean, when I'm trying to get information or from like more accountability pieces, then will like fight to get someone to talk to me. But if it's someone who's sharing a really personal part of what they've been through, or if they would be like a kind of character in my story, um, often those people like want to talk to you, and if they don't want to talk to me, then I don't really want to have to pull that out of them. So I think when you're talking to someone and they really want to share with you, that that is kind of encouraging, because it doesn't feel as much like I'm taking from them.
yeah. And you also mentioned that you are doing a long period of freelancing. How is freelancing experience nowadays? Is it difficult?
It's challenging. I think I feel I'm very busy, which is great. Like, I have a lot to do and like a lot of different projects, but it's still hard to kind of pay your bills, basically. Like, um, to like really, I just need to be on more of a grind, basically, and um, I like to take my time when I'm working and reporting things, and um, as a freelancer, you kind of have to be your own limitation there and say, okay, let's get it out. So, um, yeah, I do love the ability to choose what I'm working on. I can like go anywhere and report. Um, but yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. I mean, getting all the things done by yourself is pretty hard. But our last question is, if you are meeting a new batch of students who are going to enter journalism schools, what would you tell them as a journalist? What would be a piece of advice that you would give to them?
Well, I would say really try to think of this as an opportunity to build out a beat and to build like your foundation of reporting. Um, a lot of the reporting you do in school is local, and so not everyone wants to stay in New York, but I think thinking of like what is something that maybe this is a beat that you can build out with sources or experts that over the course of your J school time that will inform your future reporting. And like for me, a lot of the work that I'm doing now is pulling from those sources and connections from J school. And then otherwise it's just like they kind of yeah, like meet as many people as you can. Try, for me, in terms of meeting people, what's the most helpful in terms of connections are like ones where I really feel like I know someone more than just like going to as many events as I can. So don't stress out too much about missing a lot of things, and you can always go back to people and try to get their contact information. So yeah, That's not that helpful, but good luck.
Yeah, it's very helpful. I think it's just like everyone has their beautiful stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe next time start from talking to the bartender and get the,
Exactly. Yeah, just talk to as many random people as you can, and stay open and try to learn.
Right, thank you very much. That's Anna Oaks. Thank you. Stay tuned to Postgrads for more episodes.
Thank you.
See you next time.